Tell me your deepest, darkest fears. Well, not really, but the reality is we all have fears in our lives. Today, I want to explore the question, how do you overcome your fears? Fear is part of our lives. Today I want to explore 5 tools that will help us overcome the fears that we have in our lives. I also want to offer you a free gift, which is a further explanation of one of the tools that we're going to cover that will truly help you look at fear in a different way and offer you a practical way of overcoming it. Before we get into the 5 tools, one of the things that I think that's very important is to do a little self-exploration around the area of our emotional triggers. You know, our triggers help us understand what exactly our fears are. Our triggers are our response to a stimulus that happens. And one of the responses to that stimulus can be fear. Now, we tend to be creatures of habit. And therefore, one of the advantages of understanding our unique trigger is that we're able to understand where our fears come from. In fact, I coined a term, and it is trigger print. You know the way you have a fingerprint, and it's unique for every person? Well, we also have a trigger print, and that trigger print is unique for every single person. What triggers you is going to be different than what triggers me. And especially when it comes to fears, what I'm afraid of may be similar for some of the things that you're afraid of, but also I may have some unique fears that are different to you. So the first suggestion is spend a little bit of time and examine what are you afraid of? And to the extent that you know, where did that fear come from? When's the earliest memory you have of having that fear? Because that can be really important information when it comes to integrating some practices that will help us overcome that fear. The first practice is breathing. Whenever we are triggered for fear, we go into a response that you have commonly heard as fight or flight. And that fight or flight begins a process in our body that enables us to be able to defend what is coming at us or to survive what we're afraid of. Now, part of that fight or flight process is actually in our breathing. Our breathing begins to step up. We begin to produce a lot more oxygen so that we're prepared for all eventualities. Now, what that's called is our sympathetic nervous system is put into operation. And that sympathetic nervous system prepares the body to react. Now, breathing can also be used to evoke the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the nervous system which is the opposite, and it begins to relax us. It begins to take us away from this feeling of fight or flight into a much more calm state. I want to suggest 2 different breathing exercises that can be really helpful to really stir up the parasympathetic nervous system. The first is called boxed breathing. Boxed breathing is breathing in a rhythmic manner that is even. And so if you can imagine drawing a box with even sides, we're breathing in for 3 seconds, then we hold the breath for 3 seconds, we breathe out for 3 seconds, and we wait for 3 seconds before repeating the process. That rhythm has been shown to be incredibly powerful to really take us away from this feeling of anxiety and to evoke calmness within us. The second exercise is the 4-8-7. The 4-8-7 is breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 8 seconds, and breathing out for 7 seconds. Again, this breathing pattern has been shown to kick into action our parasympathetic nervous system and help us move away from the reaction we had to our fear. Our second tool is what I like to call befriending your fears. You know, very often what we do is we curse the fears. Whenever we feel fear, what happens is we say, oh no, I'm afraid, darn it. And what I like to suggest is to have a conversation with a friend. Now, why do I call fear a friend? You know, as human beings, we are built to survive. And our fears are there. They're not a good or a bad emotion. They're simply an emotion that provides us with information. And the information that fear provides us is that we feel that we are defenseless. We fear that we're not protected in this situation. Now, sometimes when our lives are actually threatened, fear is useful because it helps us survive. But also, our brain doesn't do a great job in differentiating between what really is a threat and what we just perceive to be a threat. So what I mean by befriending our fears is to look at them as this friend who's a little overly protective at times. You know, we all have people in our lives, perhaps it was our mother or our father or a good friend, who were protective of us, who tried to shield us. And in many ways, sometimes our fears are overreactive. And what happens there is they try and protect us. So looking at them as friends, to be able to say, you know, there you are, old friend, you're trying to protect me. But you know what? I'm okay. In this situation, I need to be a little bolder. In this situation, I need actually to step out and to face and confront my fear. If we begin to have a dialogue with our fears like that, we begin to see them in a different way. Instead of cursing our fears, we begin to see them as emotions that have helped us, but that are not useful at this moment in time. Our third tool is visualization. Visualization is using the power to visualize a different outcome. This is a very, very popular and powerful technique. You know, as I shoot this video, it's just been a month since the last Olympics happened. And if you watched any of those Olympic events, one of the things you'll see, especially in athletics, is athletes, as they prepare for the race, that they're visualizing everything that's going to happen in that race. They're visualizing how they'll start. They're visualizing what will happen at each stage of the race, and then they visualize the ending and hopefully them winning the race. I've also had the honor and pleasure of working with surgeons, and surgeons use visualization extensively as they prepare for important surgeries. They visualize each and every step of the surgery that's about to happen. Why is this so popular and why is this so powerful? Well, it comes from really brain science, and it comes from the fact that whenever we visualize something, we're actually creating new neural pathways in the brain. It's almost as if we are actually doing the act that we are visualizing, and our brain acts as if we are doing it, and so it creates a new neural pathway for that action. So when it comes to our fears, if we can take just one way that we're reacting, and reacting in fear that we want to change, the question therefore is there a different way I could respond to this stimulus instead of fear? And if I could respond in a different way, what would that look like? What would be happening? What would I say? What would I do? And to use that visualization to create an other alternative rather than the fear and the behavior that fear leads us to do. Now, remember I mentioned that there is a free gift. Wait to the end of the video because I want to offer you a link to that gift which explains and brings you through a process of visualization. Now, hopefully you're getting value out of this video so far. And before we move to the other two tools to use to combat some of our fears, I want to invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, to press the bell below. You will be informed of when new episodes are happening. And every week I produce a new YouTube video which concerns different areas of emotional intelligence, just like the one that we're examining today about dealing and overcoming your fears. The fourth tool is actually a flip on something that's commonly put out there. You know, when people are fearful, one of the things that's commonly said to them, you know, just think about what could be wrong. What's the worst thing that could happen? Now, I used to use that, but one of the things that I noticed that when you're dealing with a person who's full of fear, actually their imagination runs rampant. And so when you ask them the question, what could go wrong? Oh my God, they can come up with all these different scenarios of everything that could go wrong. I think a better question to ask is, what if everything went right? What would that feel like? What would that look like? What would it feel like empowered that you'd overcome the fear and that everything had turned out for the best? So that's my fourth tool. Ask, what if everything went right instead of what if everything went wrong? And the fifth tool is gradual exposure. There are times when our fears really are a big deal, and our fears really limit our lifestyle and limit what we're able to do. And so what we want to try and do is to really gradually expose ourselves so that we're really beginning to face that fear. I work in the area of public speaking, and I work with clients who are incredibly fearful of communication and speaking in front of other people. And so, one of the things I could say to them is, one way to get rid of the fear is just to stand in front of 200 people and speak. And of course, that's almost too much. What I like to suggest to them is, let's just deal with it gradually. Begin to speak in front of me. And let's then begin to speak in front of a small group and build up your tolerance for speaking in front of other people. But the important thing here is that the exposure is incredibly important. We really at some point have to face our fears. One final point before we leave. Sometimes our fears are so crippling that they actually get in the way of normal living. And if you're watching this video, then one suggestion I'd like to make is perhaps considering visiting a mental health professional who's trained in the area of fear and help you really talk to that person about those fears and overcoming that crippling fear which is getting in the way of you living your life. So there you have it, 5 different tools to deal with your fears. Now, which one should you use? Well, that's up to you. What I would suggest is experiment. Different things work for different people. And so what I would invite you to do is to take one of the different suggestions that I've made today and play with that a little bit and see if it helps you in your fear. I also mentioned that I wanted to give you a free gift, and indeed there's a link below which takes you to a free PDF around the topic of visualization, and that will help you explore that tool and to map out a visualization that you can use to overcome one of your fears. And if you've enjoyed this video, I invite you to explore the next video, which is how to silence your inner critic.